Good morning. For those of you that are listening on the podcast, I am here with Emily Wingfield, and you can also just listen on any podcast platform, but I've started, since we're doing it on Zoom and I get to actually see her, I put it on the YouTube channel, so I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But Emily, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing great.
Emily is, well, we have a history. She's a local friend, although she's in the Atlanta area. We have two descriptors of those who live in Atlanta. You're either ITP or OTP.
Exactly.
Or outside. And she's way inside and I'm way outside. But Emily, tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, what you do, and how you discovered the Enneagram.
Great. Yes. So I was born and raised in Atlanta. I'm still here. And I am married with two kids. I have an 11-and-a-half-year-old and an 8-and-a-half-year-old, two boys, which is so funny to me, just all the boyness, which I love. And before COVID, I used to joke that I taught the Enneagram and did Enneagram work from 8 to 2 in the morning. And then from 2 to 8, I was a stay-at-home mom. Now with COVID, I'm basically a 24-hour stay-at-home mom, and now I'm working the Enneagram in where I can, but I'm trying to stay flexible. That's just where we are right now. We're about to start virtual school and just really trying to stay flexible for the next year.
So you haven't started school yet?
No, we start just this Monday, so in just a few days.
Okay, that's what's very interesting. Atlanta is a big metropolitan city. Some of my grandkids started a week ago. 2 of them started this Monday, and then those of you in the other part of Atlanta. That's
exactly.
Yeah. So
yep.
Talk about having to be flexible.
Yes. My new favorite quote that I've heard recently was oh goodness, now I've just forgotten it, but it's something about being very hopeful, but also realistic, that we hope all this works out. And I'm also just, for myself, I'm just telling myself that it might be a year, that I just have to stay very, very flexible.
Yeah, I watched a video that you did actually several months ago, which is just so funny. But this video, and we might reference it later, but it was at the beginning. And I could hear by your language, it was like, well, when we're over this, probably in a couple of weeks.
Oh, yes. I thought it was going to be 2 weeks. I was like, I think we can do this for 2 weeks. We can handle it for 2 weeks, which something I think about often now is, and I think, especially thinking about it when I wear a mask, just without even thinking about it, you just throw the mask on as you go to the grocery store, is how resilient we are as human beings. And all of this, I couldn't even imagine that I was going to survive 2 weeks. And frankly, my husband didn't think I would survive 2 weeks. He's like, wasn't sure how you were going to do it. Because I like a lot of alone time, and I don't get that with kids at home. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I am an Enneagram 9. And to really drill down, I'm a self-preservation Enneagram 9, which means I think a lot about resources such as time, money, energy. All 9s think about energy, but then I joke that I've doubled down on how much I think about time and energy because of my self-preservation instinct as well.
So before we jump into the rest of this conversation, I just wanted to give a plug to our friends, Nan Henson, Linda Roberts, and that's where you and I met, was in an Enneagram workshop in Atlanta, taught by, the first one was just by Nan, and then you and I both got our certifications with Enneagram and applications through Nan and Linda.
It was the best. I can't recommend it highly enough to anyone. It is just so wonderful. I use the binders all the time. They're literally within arm's reach of me constantly. And yes, I love it.
I just love that because we learned so much together. And then these friendships that have just, because you go really deep, you can't there's no surface things there.
We've seen every person cry. And that's what I love.
I love that too. So how did you first come across the Enneagram?
Mm-hmm. So I've always loved personalities and interpersonal relationships and why people do what they do. And so I loved Myers-Briggs and DISC and love languages and different things like that. And then for the YouTubers, I always have to have my books handy because I had the wisdom of the Enneagram, and it seemed really cool, but it was so big and impressive and dense. It was a little too much for an intro for me. So I kind of picked it up, put it down a lot. And then it was really when The Road Back to You came out by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile, and really the podcast, how podcasts, gave us that narrative tradition of getting to hear people's stories and experiences as their type. So that's really when I dug into it. And funny enough, and I joke that this is exactly what an Enneagram 9 needed, is I read The Road Back to You, and I went to a 2-day workshop. And then I saw that our church was going to do a book study on it. And so I built up my courage, and I went to the minister and I said, hey, I just did a 2-day workshop about this book, and I'm really into the Enneagram. I've taken all these notes on it. I would be happy to help you with this if you would like. And for me, this was a real God wink that I needed.
That's a bold step.
Oh, she said, actually, I don't know anything about this. I've just heard a lot about it. Every minister had to pick out a book. So I just picked out this book. I was going to have to teach myself. So actually, before she taught the book study, she said, actually, would you mind just teaching the whole thing? And I'll be your assistant. She said, I'll do the room reservations and the handouts and the registration, and you just teach. I'll do whatever you need, which, I mean, it's, especially as an Enneagram 9,
Yes.
I have a friend and a fellow Enneagram 9, and I love how she says this. She says, it is so hard for her to get from A to B, but if she can, and usually if somebody can help her get from A to B, she can get from B to Z on her own. It's just that Herculean effort of, because 9s, inertia is such a big thing for them. And it's so hard to start getting moving. But once we get moving, we can usually keep it somewhat going. So that was the exact God wink I needed.
I laugh and I'm nodding because I think I probably told you, my husband is a self-preservation 9. So everything you're saying is like, yep. And there was an old movie, Fast and Furious, maybe? I'm not sure. I didn't watch it, but Nick Nolte, the clip, the meme or whatever, little graphic. And to this day, we use it. And I think that movie's probably 20 years old for an Enneagram self-pres 9, because that right action, when it's time, it's that, oh my gosh, what a beautiful description to get from point A to point B. And then Nick Nolte, since we are doing a video here, I'm going to do it. He's like, no, it's not Nick Nolte. My bad. It's Nicolas Cage. Big difference. But he's standing there with the race cars, and it's like, it's go time. And when my husband has that, this is time to go, then all the time that it took to get there, whoom, he just
Yes. Well, bless y'all's hearts for being in relationship with self-pres 9s, because I do know it's hard to watch how long it takes us to get going, because our capacity of like, but wait, I've seen that once you get going, like, you can do so much, but that A to B is tough.
Okay. So anyway, you were given this gift of
so I started
into the deep end of teaching.
Yes. So I started teaching the classes, and it was beautiful because they were free. So I felt, if people didn't like it, it was free. Yeah. And I joke that most of the students were my friends and family, because I had recruited, or church members that I knew. And so I taught a 5-week class. And then at the end of it, so many people were like, oh, that was great. My sister-in-law would like to do this. My neighbor, I told her about it. She'd like to do it. And so that was almost 3 years ago. And this was what was so beautiful for me as a 9, is it was ever so slowly that I would, teach a class. And then a friend said, Emily, these are just color 8.5 by 11s. You need to make posters. And so then I'd say, oh, okay, I'll go make posters of these images. And then somebody else said, you need to get a business card. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go get a business. I needed I mean, so many friends have helped me along the way. And so now here I am, and I do teach it, and I love it. And it's the passion of my life.
You teach and coach. You do one-on-ones.
I do one-on-ones. Yep. I'm not a certified coach. So I never like to, but it always bleeds into that. I start off by saying, okay, I'm going to teach this to you. And then it gets into relationships and all those kinds of things. But I definitely know where the line is drawn, that I'll say, okay, that's therapy. We're sticking in Enneagram stuff, and then I can refer you off to therapy for different situations. But
it's a personal journey anyway, and for you to set them on the path, and you do it so beautifully, because I've been in your classes before. So at this stage of where we are in life, we are experiencing, and I'm saying if this podcast stays online for years and people will be like, yeah, I heard about that COVID thing. This is where we are in history. And what I am finding incredibly fascinating is conversations I've had with different people of different types, myself included. The aha moment that I started calling COVID confessions, because I did a blog post about it, because I was like, if I confess this, I'm going to get kicked out of the Social 7 Club, which is my type and instinct. Because we had no choice but to revisit our default patterns. But once I realized, okay, I can't do these things. I can't have a big family gathering. I can't. In fact, all of the plans that we had, we were headed up to Ohio for an Enneagram thing with Leslie Hirschberger and all them, and it got canceled. And that meant a road trip got canceled. And the domino effect of everything that the plans we all had that were just canceled. Talk about cancel culture. It was like, yes, all our plans, our best intentions, just got canceled. So what do you do with that? And so I am seeing, like for myself, kind of liking the alone time. You're like, welcome to the club. The opposite is you're not having any alone time, really. So what have you discovered that's counter to what we would typically describe as the behaviors of a type 9, and specifically a self-pres type 9, that you're actually finding, I'm kind of liking this, or this was an unexpected revelation?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I can answer as much as the opposite, because a lot of it I'm like, yep, that's what I'm doing. But I would also say it might just have reinforced, like, oh, I always thought this, and now I'm like, yes, 100%. So for me, it is, I need alone time. 9s merge so much. So a little teaching here is that 2s kind of martyr. So they'll go along with the flow, but they're kind of maybe keeping a few little tabs in their minds as well as to how they let other people's priorities take precedence. Mm-hmm. Whereas 9s merge with it, and it just becomes our own thought. Like whatever the group or somebody else wanted to do, we kind of adopt it. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I think I did want to do that. I think that's what my original intent was when it wasn't. So being at home with my husband and 2 boys, I have to physically get away. My husband can go in the bedroom and read a book and recharge or something. I literally have to drive somewhere else, get away from all other, mainly human beings in my own relationship world, but really I like to get away from all human beings if possible. Because I take on other people's stuff. I notice all those things. I think that's a surprise for a lot of people, is that because 9s seem kind of laid back, but we're taking so much more in than people really realize. So I have to physically remove myself from others to get back in touch with myself, because I honestly don't even always know what I'm thinking when I'm in a household with people all the time. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing, is it's like, yeah, that is 100% me. And it's not just, oh, I like alone time. It is, I need alone time, or eventually I feel like I'm losing my mind. I get a little cuckoo. That's one. Another, so for my self-preservation, it really comes, so interesting. My husband is self-preservation dominant as well as a self-preservation 3.
Wow.
His focus on that really comes out in kind of time, but really money, of resources, conserving that resource. Mine comes out in food and comfort and energy. So COVID has not been, it's been interesting to notice how obsessive I have become about food, and it's just having enough. It's just, I mean, our basement is filled with extra food. And so it's been fun to talk to other people that have said, oh, I didn't really go to, when all this hit, I didn't really go to the grocery store. Like, we had enough. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I went and spent $500 because I couldn't bear the thought that we might not have enough.
Well, that was what I thought was very interesting. And it was an Instagram, TV.
IGTV.
See, I got to catch up with all this.
You are very hip.
I promised my daughter, I said, okay, I promise you, because I like to do all the new fun things. I was like, I will not be a TikTok mom. She was like, thank you, please don't. So, but when I did watch that, what you were really eloquent in describing, which is to a lot of people that are, know their basic type. I don't know who all listens to this podcast in particular, but where we integrate and disintegrate. And what you brought out was the place that under duress at times, and let me make this disclaimer. I believe that you can, we have every number. I'm every woman. We can access the energy of any type, but we have places where we go naturally. And I think you can access the highs and the lows. So for me, as a 7, I can go to 1 and get panicky and rigid, and frantic, and cleaning everything obsessively, or I can access that wonderful part of a 1, and I get so much done. So in this example, the reason I'm saying that is you went to 6 almost in a frenzy. Can you just share about that?
Oh, sure. And I'm always so thankful to know the Enneagram, because I could do so much self-talk, because a lot of this is just learning to do compassionate self-talk to yourself. And so I was in the grocery store on, I think it might've been that March 13th, Friday the 13th, as everything was shutting down, or maybe it was a little before then actually, and I could feel my heart starting to race, and I could feel a shortness of breath, and I could feel really panicky feelings and a lot of worst case scenario thinking. And so I would have to do a lot of talking to myself. Okay, Emily, take deep breaths. This feels really scary to you right now, but you've made it through other hard things. You'll make it through this. And I could say, wow, I'm going to 6 right now. I can tell this. And then, especially those first few weeks, when eventually we did run out of fruits and vegetables and stuff, and it was time to go back to the store, I went back. I eventually went 2 more times, over some point of time. And then I actually told my husband, I said, I can't go anymore. This is too panic inducing for me, because I can tell that it's hitting my triggers of self-preservation, not enough food, and my Enneagram 6, the low side of my Enneagram 6ness is coming up. I said, I can do other things, but this is not healthy for me. And because it doesn't bother him, he could just go to the store, didn't feel any of those feelings. And another point about where I noticed my 6ness come up is in those first few weeks. I was definitely, in stress, as all of us were feeling stress those first few weeks of quarantine. And I remember I went on a walk, and a lot of spinning thoughts, and I came home and I started planning my funeral. And I wrote, which, by the way, that's not odd to me. Like I've read before that self-preservation people are much more comfortable with, or I don't want to I don't want to teach right now because I'm not 100% sure of this, but I've heard that self-preservation people think about death more than other types. I can't quote where I heard that. I can't remember, but I just thought that was interesting because I actually do think about death and I'm very comfortable with.
It's not a morbid.
Yeah, I just think about it often. But when I came home and started planning my funeral and then wrote my best friend and sent her the Word document and said, hey, just a heads up. And luckily she's self-preservation dominant and she's a 4. So she's very comfortable. She was like, totally. Yep. I'm going to save this in my file so that I'll make sure you get what you want. But my point in all of this,
Oh, wow.
I feel like your podcast listeners are like, this woman's crazy.
No, it's great.
But that's then later I was like, oh, that was my unhealthy sickness coming up of, okay, there's a chance. And here's what was fascinating about this to me. And I love that I had the language to explain it to my husband and best friend is I said, I don't think I'm going to die at all. I think I'm a healthy 40-year-old. I don't think I'm going to die. And yet I want to be prepared if I do. So that was the funny part is I wasn't depressed. I wasn't overwhelmed. I said, I think I have a 0.01% chance of getting this. And yet, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go on and make a funeral plan.
This is amazing to me. This is amazing. And I have to tell you, let me turn this back on me for a minute. It's such an aha moment. I also am fascinated with, I love cemeteries, but my grandmother is also a 7, hands down. Everybody says it. She's 96, and there's not a family member who knows the Enneagram, and many of them do, are like, she's a 7, she's a 7. And maybe I inherited some of this from her because it's been a natural thing, but we both have this, we kind of like to have our funeral before we actually die. So we could see who all's there, not on a, like, oh, who loves me, but more of a, let's make this a big deal. Let's celebrate all the great things. Let's have fun. We might make it a theme funeral. I have actually thought that, and actually have thought somebody should create a funeral home called The Last Resort. Get it? Like Last Resort. But you have a themed, like if you're a big football fan, then let's have all the people here. So that's interesting because it's like, what are they going to put on my tombstone? But I also want to be cremated. So I'd like to probably have my ashes put into a jewelry thing. There's never been any thought of, there are actually real steps of the particulars that go on with a funeral. I hadn't really planned on that part. I'm just planning the party part.
And do you know what is also, first of all, this is a fascinating conversation. Do you know what is also fascinating is I have actually thought, so, 9s are always worried about other people's comfort and peace. I have actually thought about, well, is that song too long? Because, you never want, when you have to sit through a really long song. So here as an alive 9, I'm already thinking that I don't want people to have to sit too long at a funeral for me. Like, they have other things to do. And that song is too long. We kind of need to get this thing over with. I don't want to take up too much of their time.
I'm sorry. This is probably the best conversation whether we're going to do the Enneagram or not. No, it is. It's all.
This is a whole new aspect of the Enneagram. What do you think about when you think about your death and funeral?
What am I going to wear? And here's a funny thing. Before you and I ever got started actually recording this, I talked to you about the term casket hair. Because you don't have to fix it in the back. You just need to make sure. And that's what we have with Zoom now is, casket hair. Oh my gosh, I got way off track. I'm sorry.
This has been fun. Here's another little, since we're on this, I'm sorry, this might go too long. This is another fascinating question in all of this funeral stuff. I have told my husband, I said, well, when I die, take my rings and give them to, like, hopefully if my boys have gotten married, give them to those girls or something. And it bothered my husband. He's like, this is our wedding ring. Like, I want you to be buried with it. Like, I mean, and I'm like, well, that's a waste. I said, there is no reason for a diamond to be in the ground. I was like, take that thing off my finger and give it to other people. So it's just interesting what comes up for different people. And I'm nines, especially self-pres nines, are very logical and down to earth. So it's like, or very practical. Like, well, that's just stupid to have that in the ground. Like, I don't know.
It's also a resource that
it's just, they could sell this and have more money.
There you go. Back to that. Oh my goodness. Well, this is very eye-opening, very revealing. Here we are. This will be September by the time it's aired, and we are not done. We are somewhat adjusted. We go out occasionally, but I bet you never go without your mask.
No.
I don't now, but it took me a while because I was like, I'm not going to get this. I mean, it's just, I knew it was a thing, but I really didn't take it serious.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. I learned to, and now that's a part of our life. But I think learning to navigate our types in truly, and here's the term I'm so sick of saying, unprecedented times. They are.
Oh, yeah.
None of us have ever come face to face with ourselves as much as we have now.
I'll tell you. Do we still have time?
Oh, yeah.
I always have thoughts about different things. There was a moment so nines really like to narcotize, which it does not mean like narcotics. It just means numb out. Whatever life feels too much, or we don't feel like we have our peace, we try to numb out. So, it could be Candy Crush. It could be scrolling Instagram, Facebook. It could be drinking. It could be exercise. It could be anything that we are trying to numb back out to life. And there was an evening, it was about 8 or 9 o'clock. And I was so sick of myself and I couldn't numb out anymore. Like, I had already had it, I had already eaten what food I wanted to eat to try to numb my feelings. I'd already had a beer and I really didn't want to have another beer. And I'd already scrolled Facebook. I had already, zoned out on Instagram. It was too late for a walk. I had already done all these things and I was just stuck with myself. And it was just one of those COVID moments that I still remember thinking, I just can't get away from myself. I'm sick of everything. I'm sick of everyone. I'm sick of myself most of all. And yet that's the time that I think one of the fascinating things about COVID is we can't outrun ourselves anymore.
Exactly. Oh.
I have definitely seen this, especially in the aggressive stance of 3s, 7s, and 8s, that normally y'all could stay so fast that you could just keep moving and you didn't have to feel the feelings, because as long as you stayed busy and couples and activities and work, and again, this is for all of us, but we can't outrun ourselves or distract ourselves anymore. So I do encourage people, as painful and uncomfortable as it is, like, this is the biggest opportunity for growth any of us have ever had.
Ever. You're right. And we can't outrun ourselves. That's a great line. I'm gonna have to use that one. But I think we are all truly doing the best we can. And it's that, when you know better, hopefully you do better. A lot of people know better and they don't do any better. But I think that having that intentional awareness, it all comes down to this, is doing what you talked about earlier, having that awareness, being able to have the conversation within our own minds to say, I see what I'm doing. That to me is the gift of this tool in particular, the Enneagram, because it allows you to put the pin in the map. You are here. Yeah. Where do you want to go? And to actually watch that and go, oh, I'm tanking. I know I am. And I know I have a choice to become more present to what I'm doing, kind of shift our thinking, because that's where it all is.
Well, I have a thought about it. My therapist shared this idea with me, and it's always helped me, is talking about with noticing with compassion. And she said, Emily, if one of your boys had a bad dream and came into you in the middle of the night, you would not say, why the hell are you waking me up? That's stupid. You know, it's just a dream. You would never say that. You would say, oh gosh, honey, you're right. That does sound really scary. Okay, let's walk you back to bed. I'm going to rub your back. It's just a dream. It's just some crazy thoughts of your brain trying to make sense of the day before. It's going to be okay. Let's think happier thoughts, or just with kindness and compassion. And so she taught me to talk to myself that way. So when you notice yourself going down, talk to yourself as you would if a child had a bad dream. Just, yeah, those thoughts do feel scary. And, you feel like you might be trapped in negative emotions, Danae might feel, but that's just your thoughts, and it's okay. Let's do some deep breaths and let's go on a walk, and we'll get recentered.
Absolutely. And I love that you said boldly, my therapist.
Oh, yes.
Everybody.
I love therapy so much.
I love therapy. Yes.
Therapy is so important. And what's been really fun for me is because I've always loved mental health, I worked in a therapy office right out of college, because I thought I wanted to be a therapist. So I interned there. And then another God wink, I met my own therapist there, which was, by the way, I'm very open about mental health. So when I had my first major depressive episode when I was about 21 years old, right out of college, couldn't find a job, and just all the things. So it was a real God wink for me that I had just 6 months prior interned at this counseling office. So I already knew these people. And here was the beautiful thing. They knew me as mentally average Emily, meaning I was in a normal, good space. So then when I got depressed, they knew, okay, this is not normal Emily. Anyways, so that's where I met my therapist, who I've had since I was 21.
Wow.
And so she has these notes on me. And I'll go 2 years without seeing her. And then I'll go once a week for 4 months if it's, a big thing. And it's been interesting. I guess what I would like to say about the idea of you can't outrun yourself. She has notes and notes and notes on me. And so she can sometimes refer back and say, Emily, do you remember that when these kinds of things come up, this is your natural thought pattern do you remember back in, 2012, you had these thoughts, 2016, you had these thoughts.
Oh, wow.
And the funny part is she teaches me the same things over and over again, but I forget them. And then she reminds me, and I go, oh yes, cognitive distortions. Oh yes, that was mind reading. Oh yes. Okay. And so I think a lot of times people think there's, yes, there's always more and more awareness, but a lot of this, it's kind of like, I always think of with math. Yes, there's algebra and geometry and calculus, but the majority of math is 2 + 2 = 4. Right. And, and multiplication and division. The majority of this is kind of the basics.
Yeah.
So get the basics, get good with the basics, and then explore all the amazing facets of the Enneagram. And a lot of it comes right back down to the basics of levels of health and stress and security and core motivations and fears. And anyways, it's just fun for me.
That's why I listen to certain things that I have listened to. I've said this before, so you'll just have to hear it again. I have listened to Eckhart Tolle that I had on my old iPod. But then I lost my iPod, and then I found those exact same recordings on a podcast that had been transferred over. So I've literally listened to them over 1,000 hours. During one of the most difficult times of my life, I walked and listened to the same thing over and over and over, because when a rut is deep in your mind, when a pattern is deep, you can't just listen and go, got it. That's a good point. I'm good now, because we will go right back to that deep rut. So what we talk about in the Enneagram, I listen to the podcast, I read the same materials, and every time it settles in a little bit deeper until that becomes our those are the basics that we can use when other situations that take us off course come in. So
Love it. Yeah.
that's right. Go back to the basics. It's like, today, how many times can you listen to that?
I know. But it meets you where you are in that time. Like you have an aha moment because you can apply it to like, oh, well, now it makes sense because of this situation. Well, now it makes sense because of this situation.
Yes, that's exactly right. So anyway, I have taken all your morning here.
Oh my gosh, I love it. This was so much fun.
Oh, thank you. I love it. I hope Emily is also on the board of the Georgia chapter of the International Enneagram Association. At one point in history, we met monthly in Atlanta. Now we're having Zoom meetings, which are wonderful because we can still stay connected. But the day will come when we can meet in person again. And if you're in the Atlanta area and you want to know more about the Enneagram, or you already love it, are committed to it, love for you to join us.
Those meetings are great. Yes, we loved the in-person, but you're right, even having the Zoom. And I mean, it's just amazing teachings. And, and now you get to do it from the comfort of your home. And actually, because I'm not the best IEA member, because I should know the date right off the top of my head, but in October, Russ Hudson, one of the authors of The Wisdom of the Enneagram, will be speaking virtually. So let's put that in the show notes. I will send it to you. And because it's a half day thing and it's going to be amazing. I mean, just to be able to have him teaching us here in Georgia, although virtually, is just, it was huge that they were able to get him. So it was really exciting. And just the Enneagram is so important and powerful and worth always learning more. It's really fun.
Yes, because as I like to conclude the shows, I feel like this has given us such a gift of embracing and loving who we are. So I truly hope those of you who are listening get to know the joy of who you are by loving your own number. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. This was such a great time.
I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Really?
Bye.
Okay, bye.